Good morning, everyone. Welcome once again to our sixth webinar session from our climate action group. My name is Carlos Bueno. I would like to introduce to you our directors and co-directors from our group, Tamsin and Jane, who are going to open today's session. Jane and Tamsin, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. I'll take it off and then hand over to Jane. So yes, I'm Tamsin Farragon. I've had the pleasure and the honor and privilege of leading this climate action group for IFLA, which is the International Federation of Landscape Architects. We have an amazing team of, I think it's 10 now, passionate professionals from around the world, covering almost every region, although as we were saying before we kicked off, there are a few gaps. From different perspectives. We have practitioners, we have academics, we have city officials such as myself and Jane, who's just retired from Toronto. So we bring very different perspectives and points of view to this particular piece of work. We have Carlos in Colombia, who has been driving these webinars most spectacularly, and curating them around regions and particular themes, which I think is a really, really great lens to look at climate through, because it means that you can get to detail quite quickly, which is, I think, what we're all really interested in. I'm not going to ramble any longer because I'd love to hand over to Jane, other than to welcome our speakers from the Middle East and to say I can't wait to hear your reflections and your insights and your knowledge. Having worked in the Middle East, have the hugest respect for the work that landscape architects do in that part of the world. So Jane, over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jane Welsh. I am also so very honored to welcome you to this session of our IFLA Climate Action webinars. I'm a landscape architect, just retired, and I live and I did work in Toronto. And I've had the privilege there of leading many innovative and progressive climate actions, such as the Toronto Green Standard, which set sustainable performance measures for new development, and the Green Roof Bylaw, which resulted in construction of over 1,400 green roofs on large buildings in Toronto. So as you know, the webinar series covers topics of importance to climate action, biodiversity, nature-based water systems, heat, coastal flooding, nature-positive cities, water-sensitive urbanism, a lot of which we'll talk about today. And we'll wrap it all up with the voices of youth in a compendium of actions focused on the global regions. And we've mentioned the Americas, Asia-Pacific, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. So I'm also delighted to have Jala here today because we met in Toronto when she was giving a lecture to students of the Masters of Landscape Architecture program, which are also public lectures, which those of us who are in the profession really enjoy to come to because there's always excellent speakers. And please stay tuned for additional webinars. I think we have one on the Africas coming up, and then the one on youth and a global perspective. And I'll turn it back to Carlos and look forward to our conversation and the presentations.
Thank you very much, Tamsin and Jane, for opening today's session. So hello, everyone. My name is Carlos Bueno. I'm an architect and landscape researcher, and I'm delighted to moderate this webinar on refreshing arid cities with living systems through climate action in landscape architecture. So today's sessions invites us to look beyond urban just beautification and ask more urgent questions. How can landscape architecture help arid cities cool themselves through living systems, cultural knowledge, water-sensitive design, and ecological grounded practice? So we'll hear three presentations from leading landscape voices, of course, working across the Middle East and related contexts. And then, of course, James will guide us a discussion and Q&A to draw out connections across the talks. So it is my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker, Jala Maksumi. So Professor Jala Maksumi is a highly respected landscape architect, co-founder of the Lebanese Landscape Association, and the recipient of both the Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe Award and the ICLA's Lifetime Achievement Award. Her work has long connected ecological design, community inclusion, landscape heritage, post-war recovery, and sustainable urban greening. Her presentation today is called Cool Futures in Hot Lands, Climate Smart Landscape Design. Professor Jala, thank you very much for being here with us. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Tamsin and Jane, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure, and as we were talking, it's really lovely to share experiences from Southwest Asia, and as I understand, from North Africa eventually as well. So what I wanted to talk about is, let me just get this box out of the way. Okay, so cool futures in hot lands. I will look at energy crisis, past and present, and look at architecture, which is an emerging profession in my part of the world, in Southwest Asia, what is termed as the Middle East. And then I'll talk about two strategies: climate-wise planting, water-wise planting, and conclude with lessons learned. Today's global concern for energy crisis, because of the war in Southwest Asia, takes me back in time to 1973, to another energy crisis. This was not associated with war like the one we are now experiencing, but because oil-producing countries in the region boycotted the US and Europe because they wanted recognition of the Palestinian issue and the plight of Palestinians. What happened is that for us as designers, I was an architect then, was a surge in research in architecture, in urban design, and in landscape, less in landscape, on alternative building systems. And this book from the 70s, The Autonomous House, for example, was the in thing when I was doing my master's in the US. So all of this came out of the energy crisis. People realized they had to look to other energy sources, and solar energy and wind energy were the key. But also, as I did in this poster I sketched for a conference we had in Baghdad in the university, to look at traditional ways of dealing with climate hasn't changed. Climate was the same before. People dealt with it. It's maybe more emphasized. One of the key conferences was passive and low energy alternatives, which later became passive and low energy architecture, PLEA series. And these really looked into those from a design perspective. And I found myself in these. At the time, I was a young architect in Baghdad, Iraq, teaching and practicing, fascinated with landscape, but not knowing what landscape architecture was, apart from it being about outdoor spaces. It's not in the building. What caught my attention was why were projects that were commissioned that looked so green on drawings ended up in such a miserable state? Why there was no appropriate vocabulary for landscape? Usually landscapes emulated lawn and flowering bed, which didn't survive in the hot climate of Baghdad. So I combined two things. I combined this energy crisis and looking for alternative energy with my search about what is landscape architecture. One source that helped me was the traditional practices. This is a town, one of the towns that I was working with. And you can see from the section, it's Ana on the Euphrates River, very close in Iraq, between the Syrian and Iraqi borders. And you can see from the section that the just take this down. You can see that how the date palms create an umbrella. And here, for the first time, I realized how important it was for passive cooling to work with shade. This is a very important element, and it is in the landscape. So you can see that they've used the topography and they've used the canopy of the palm trees to create an umbrella for cultivating and for their use. And in the end, the old Anna was a perfect environment, suitable, responsive to the ecology and to the climate, whereas the new town that was built failed miserably. It was totally unadapted and out of place, really. No design for the landscape. So I looked to shading as a key principle for improved building energy management and eventually energy efficient site planning. I'm talking in the 80s, so this is a very long time ago. Some of you maybe were not born. So the key was to look at the solar geometry because of the elliptical course of the Earth revolving around the sun. We have the solar geometry means that we have short shades, the shortest shade in the summer solstice around this time of the year, and the longest one in December. So what I did was, how do trees perform with this geometry? So I used a very antiquated system because there were no computer programs. Now you can do it with just with a click of a button. But at the time there was a fixed light source and a table that swiveled to emulate the longitude and latitude of the site and the time of day. And I sketched the shade to find out how best to place trees in the foreground of buildings or in a certain position in relation to the building. I've cited the published in Plia series, so you can, if you're interested, go back. I then moved to passive solar cooling of building sites. What happens if we use trees independently, not in conjunction with building? So I was becoming more interested in the landscape itself, not just in conjunction with the building. So again, I plotted the solar geometry of the trees and measured average distances for the different times and modularized them. You can see the modular configuration depending on the size of tree. This created a system of organizing the site. Enclosures are a key because you keep getting a large percentage of shaded site area, but without filling the whole site with trees. So it's a very clever way of going about it, and it's a very practical way as well. And I didn't realize that, 40 years later, I applied it to a project for a new town in south of Basra, in the southern part of Iraq, extreme part of Iraq. The dark part in the master plan is the shelter belt. And this shelter belt I designed exactly with those enclosures that I had studied, researched a long time ago. And what happens is that you have those enclosures, you can use them here. They can be used to situate solar panels, you can have sports, it's just a multifunctional way to landscape, and it works quite successfully. The last attempt was to look at climbers because trees take a long time to grow, and climbers are faster, of course, but also they don't have the thickness. It's like a green wall, which is what it is now known as. So this was an actual project where there were two buildings on a construction site, and I asked permission to retrofit one of the buildings with a simple structure, planted Lufa cylindrica, a very common climber. And once it grew, this is at the beginning, I measured temperatures of the walls inside and outside for both This and an identical building that was not rehabilitated. And it was very interesting what came out, but one of the things that were of relevance, I think direct relevance, was that the climbers or green walls or screening facades, building facades, you had a time lag in peak energy demand, which is very important because the city then can phase out its use. This I applied to, again in 2006, to a project in rehabilitating Dahia in southern Lebanon, which is again now under attack. And you can see now more examples, again from Beirut, of climbers directly on a building facade or trailed on simple structure. There is a very big difference also in the 2026 energy crisis. It's not just an energy crisis. The world has changed. We know with global warming that climate has become extreme in some places with flooding, rain and flooding, and in other places like our part of the world with extreme temperatures and desertification. There's also awareness of biodiversity. That is another threat of climate change and of human impact. And the third is that people are much more aware and engaged with what is happening to the environment. Because it's no longer as it was in the 70s. The environment is not just resources and pollution to air and to water. It's about heritage, about livelihoods and identity. So for my part of the world in Southwest Asia and North Africa, you can see this is an outdated map, and already you find that we have exceeded the percent that of the withdrawal of water exceeds what is available. So water is a key, and we as landscape architects work with water. So we have to look at this. So this brings me to the second principle, which is water-wise planting. And here I had gone into ecology, and ecological zoning for water efficiency is the way I approached it. And you can see from this image, it is having a gardenesque water-intensive landscape closer to the building where it can be seen and where it is more accessible to irrigate, then an intermediate landscape that does not require irrigation or only upon establishment and beyond the desert. This is for one of the projects we did in Liwa. Liwa is an oasis, and it was a Liwa master plan, and these are at water transects that starts from conservation of biodiversity, ex situ use of native plants, down to rangeland rehabilitation. This is how the plants, I found them in rangeland rehabilitation in Iraq, a lot of the plants, and then to enclosure belts and so on. So the application came with water efficient landscaping for another oasis in Algeria, and you have the map upstairs. It's a totally desert region. This is an image from Timimoun oasis, and it was a project for Total France to accommodate workers and engineers of the oil industry with Butek. Landscape was consultant. And so again, the same principle of using this zoning from the least water use to the maximum water use. And this is a map with the different zones, basically boundary landscape that doesn't need any irrigation, the middle landscape, and the ornamental, which is the orange color one. And these are the key landscape components. Palm grove, the communal lawn. Lawn was limited to a very small area, shaded walkways. There was an agriculture community garden, a potager, and the flowering plants. So these are samples of the landscape that we created. And again, you can see an image of the palm trees creating this umbrella for cultivation underneath or for activities and so on. So this is really efficient, again, because it's multifunctional. I used Bougainvillea and Lantana camara as shrubs, not as climbers, to add color. With, they are also quite hardy. And this is an image of with the different zones between the housing for the workers and between the agriculture, the communal part. This is the communal part. I didn't show the communal part. This is the communal part, and these are the laborers' accommodations. These are the engineers, and this is the potager, the kitchen garden. So this has been implemented. These are images from Hala Yunus, the architect, with which I collaborated for the landscape. And you can see an interpretation of the water requirements and the water management scheme for this kind of ecological zoning. So what are the lessons learned? First of all, I think from my experience, energy and water efficiency is a limitation, but it is also an inspiration for a new vocabulary of landscape architecture that is grounded. Before there was the word sustainable, that was responsive to the climate, to the ecology, and that looked right and worked well for people and for nature. And that was, of course, functional so that you didn't spend too much water. The other lesson is multifunctionality, and this applies not just to climate, but to biodiversity. In the Global South, resources for water-intensive landscapes, both water resources, but financial and human resources for management are not available, except in the Gulf states, maybe where there is a lot of funding. So really, we have to combine, like we did, biodiversity with shelter belts, maybe water intensive between buildings where they can gain from water wash off from the buildings. And the final lesson was to always look to vernacular and traditional practices. We don't have to reinvent the wheel with new names, nature inspired solutions and circularity and resilience. All of these exist in vernacular landscapes. We have to look to these and try to understand what they were doing. The climate was more or less, as I said, the same. Thank you. Stop sharing.
All right. So thank you, Professor Jala, for that rich and timely presentation, quite timely. And you're giving us a powerful framework for thinking about climate smart landscape designed in arid region, which is so specific, and then especially through ideas of climate-wise and then water-wise planting, which is quite different from region to region. So what stands out it's a reminder that cooling is not simply just about just adding greenery, but actually thinking about it, and then but also about designing ecologically and culturally appropriate system that responds to the heat and scarcity. These three topics at the end of it, at your presentation, through energy, water efficiency, multifunctional landscapes, and also looking back to vernacular practices or let's just say, and please correct me, local knowledge as well, to go back to what was happening actually back then, and the communities actually work on what they have back in the ages. So thank you very much for this timely presentation. And now we are going to have our second presenter. Her name is Professor Beata Drexler. So Professor Beata is Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture at the American University of Beirut. She brings over 30 years of professional experience across Europe, Central America, and the Middle East, and her research explores landscape democracy and digital transformation. Her talk is titled Beyond Shade, Community Knowledge and the Social Production of Cool Landscapes in the Middle East. So Professor Beata, thank you very much for joining us. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy being here. Jala, thank you for such a beautiful presentation. Let me share my screen now. Okay. Can you see the screen with the title?
Not yet.
Sorry. Sorry again. Now it's a blue screen,
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
and now we have with the title. Okay, now it's
Yes.
working.
All good. Good to go.
So, thank you very much. Let me just remove the box as well. So, when I was invited to participate in this webinar, I checked what my colleagues are going to talk about. And I wanted to add something complementary I'm working on. And Professor Jara already demonstrates how climate-wise and water-wise planting can create environmentally responsive landscapes. And I believe Mohammed is going to talk about living systems and how they regulate urban climates through ecological processes. My contribution is to emphasize that these solutions succeed when communities understand them, support them, and become their long-term stewards. Cooling cities requires ecological systems, but it requires also social systems. Now, when we see this beautiful courtyard in Damascus, normally we ask questions whenever we are talking about cooling cities. We ask questions: how many trees do we need? How much green infrastructure should be built? How much temperature reduction can be achieved? But I would like to ask different questions today. Who creates cool landscapes? Who uses them? Who maintains them? And whose knowledge informs their design? Because cooling is not only an environmental process, it's also a social process. There is this missing dimension in urban cooling. Landscape architecture has become increasingly effective at measuring urban heat island surface temperature, canopy cover, and ecosystem services. And there is a lot of literature on that, and it's growing. But very often we forget about people's perception of heat, everyday adaptation practices, cultural relationships with shade and water, and community stewardship of green spaces. If cooling strategies ignore this dimension, many interventions remain underused, poorly maintained, or socially inequitable. For centuries, communities across the region have developed place-based strategies for thermal comfort, choosing shading walking routes, gathering beneath specific tree species, for instance, using courtyards as social and climatic spaces, managing water collectively, and adapting daily activities to seasonal and diurnal heat cycles. These practices represent living knowledge systems, and they are forms of climate adaptation developed long before the term even exists. So when we think about cooling, we often think of parks, for instance, as green infrastructure. But there are also social infrastructure. It might be a shaded square, a neighborhood garden, a tri-lined street, or a small community park. Even abandoned space is a part of this social infrastructure. They may serve as meeting place, health resource, social support network. And this value of these places extends far beyond the temperature reduction. In Beirut, access to public green spaces is very limited and unevenly distributed, especially with new developments. There are very few really public areas. So residents often identify cooling places that are absent from official plans, like informal gardens, university campuses, religious compounds, waterfront spaces like this Corniche space, and shaded streets. And community perception frequently reveal a different geography of thermal comfort than that captured by conventional planning tools. And this suggests that understanding how people experience cooling might be as important as measuring temperature itself. There are many initiatives and residents can do many things. So this the common assumption is that experts design climate adaptation and citizens benefit from it. But the different model that can be proposed is that community are not simply users of cooling landscapes, but they are co-creators. They can plant trees, care for gardens, share local environmental knowledge, identify vulnerable areas, and develop everyday adaptation practices. This is example from Ajman, United Arab Emirates, where a transformative neighborhood initiative was created. So there is a group of youth that is working on community gardens, and as expressed by facilitators from Baha'i educational programs, this project is more than an effort to beautify our environment. It's a vibrant expression of community service and spiritual growth. Still, there is a question that remains: how much we are implementing Western maintenance schemes and future project development based on local culture? Because the idea of community garden, it's not very much grounded of community garden. A larger society is not very much grounded in the culture. Now, what can make local knowledge visible? Definitely emerging tools, digital tools, and in this chapter, climate change and landscape, I talked about different emerging technologies in different scales in the Middle East, Arab Middle East. So definitely what we can have participatory GIS, community mapping, virtual reality, even citizen science. So these technologies can help bridge scientific measurements and life experience. They allow citizens to become active contributors to climate adaptation planning. One example of the research is from Amman, from Jordan, where the projects in peri-urban models, and this is in neighborhood of Deir Bar, they utilized GIS metrics to analyze the relationship between green infrastructure, community walkability, and resident sense of community. So by embedding green infrastructure, walkability, and social cohesion into spatial planning, cities like Amman can build more equitable, sustainable, and climate-resilient neighborhoods and advance local well-being while fulfilling global sustainability commitments. Similar examples were done in Alexandria in Egypt, where studies utilized participatory GIS mapping to document local community activities and perception to boost civic involvement in redesigning and optimizing neighborhood public schools. Well, this is a picture from my balcony here in Beirut. I have tomatoes, I have herbs. So it's very important that even balcony with pots and green roofs are very important places that can serve as thermal refuge. And in the research done by Talhoub, she explored urban balcony gardens and a resident-led natural-based solution. So these solutions are led by individuals, how we can support them. There are many programs. This picture is from program done for Syrian refugees in Lebanon. But there is also a man rooftop garden in cities like Jordan. Residents are utilizing lightweight planting materials, drip irrigation system, and grey water reuse on rooftops. Beirut's urban agriculture, this was in response to food insecurity because of the crisis. Tunis community farms, the residents adapt ancient agroecological methods to transform neglected urban public spaces into managed community plots, supporting household consumptions and selling surplus. So this, the rooftops, the balconies in such dense settings like Beirut are become crucial, and they contribute into cooling of our cities. So this cooling strategies definitely in the future should include ecological intelligence, traditional ecological knowledge, community participation, and digital engagement, such as PPGIS or social media. So this combination can produce climate adaptation strategies that are technically effective, culturally grounded, and socially equitable. And I wanted to show the project that we started to work now. It's local landscape system labs, empowering system thinking for transformative change and territorial regeneration. So with this program, we are enhancing the competence for system thinking in the context of community-led landscape development in urban, peri-urban, and rural context. The system thinking provides a valuable framework for understanding and addressing the complex interconnected challenges of sustainable development and building capacity for individuals, organizations, and societies. Right now in Beirut, our project is focusing on traditional urban agriculture for the well-being and health of communities, including enhancing thermal control. So it's not so much about producing food as such, but with micro interventions, we can create and we can educate. So the question is not simply how do we cool our cities, but rather how do we create cities where people, communities, and landscape work together to produce cooling? In the Middle East, many of the answers already exist within local knowledge, everyday practices, and community relationship with place. But amid displacement and conflict, this knowledge is often lost or even deliberately erased. So our task as landscape architects is not only to design cooler cities, it's to record this knowledge, is to create conditions through which communities can participate in cooling them. Thank you very much.
Dear Professor Beata, thank you very much for your fantastic presentation, which broadens the conversation in an important way. It's just the participation of people in the community, and then reminds us that it's just not only just urban cooling, but also it's not also like a technical issue, but it's quite deep rooted into community and people. And that is also like a social one. So the idea that cool landscapes are produced through everyday practices, local knowledge, cultural habits, and participatory process give the session like a quite deeper human dimension, I would say, to your actually Lola practice, right? So thank you very much for that presentation. And now we're going to watch a presentation by our professor Mohammad Motalbi. Although our professor is not able to be with us today live, we're very pleased to include his recorded presentation. So Professor Mohammad is an environmental designer and urbanist, co-founder and former president of IFLAN Middle East, and long-standing practitioner and researcher in ecological design, landscape urbanism, and multidisciplinary planning. His talk is titled Cities That Sweat, Living Systems for Arid Urbanism. So I'm gonna now will show his recorded presentation. Is it going through?
I can see it on the screen.
Yes.
It's a connection to the problems that city.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you. I will talk about historical experiences related to urban cooling in historical cities of Iran and its connection to the problems that cities face today. My presentation title is Cities That Sweat, Living Systems for Arid Urbanism. Iran is a land of extreme climatic contrasts, from very hot deserts to humid coastal regions and cool mountain environments. People across this land have spent thousands of years developing different ways of adapting to nature and surviving environmental challenges. Today, as cities around the world struggle with climate change, water scarcity, and extreme heat, these historical experiences may offer valuable lessons for the future. Some of the most remarkable examples of environmental adaptation can be found in the desert cities of Iran. These cities were built in extremely hot and dry climates long before electricity or mechanical air conditioning existed. Yet people developed intelligent ways to cool their homes and cities while consuming very little energy. One of the greatest examples is the city of Isfahan. As you can see, Isfahan is located in central Iran within a dry climatic region. However, the city has always had one important natural advantage: a river originating from Zagros mountains in western of Iran flows through the city. More than 400 years ago, during the Safavid era, Shah Abbas, the greatest king of Safavid era, gathered architects, engineers, scholars, and artists in his court. Under his rule, Isfahan became one of the most advanced cities of its time. But what makes Isfahan especially important today is not only its beauty. It is the way the city responded to climate. As the center of Isfahan flows the Zayanderud River, instead of treating the river simply as a water source, the planners of the city transformed it into part of a larger environmental system. They created a network of green-blue corridors that spread through the city like living veins. Water from the river flowed through a system of canals that carried cool air and moisture deep into the urban fabric. These canals pass through gardens, public spaces, neighborhoods, and agricultural land. The people of Isfahan even gave a name to this system, the Mahdi. The Mahdis were not only water canals, they functioned as environmental infrastructure. Together with trees, gardens, and shaded pathways, they helped reduce urban heat, improve air circulation, and create more comfortable public spaces. In many ways, the city itself functioned like a natural cooling machine. Today, urban planners speak about green infrastructure, ecological corridors, climate responsive cities, and urban cooling systems. Yet Isfahan was already applying these ideas centuries ago. What is remarkable is that this system was never separated from daily life. Water, landscape, architecture, and public space work together as one connected ecological system. But it raises an important question. What happened in places where there was no river? What happened in the cities that no have rivers? Could people still cool their cities and homes in extreme desert conditions? Answer can be found in another desert city of Iran, Yazd. Unlike Isfahan, Yazd has no permanent river. It stands in the middle of the desert, surrounded by dry landscapes and intense summer heat. Yet the people of Yazd also developed remarkable environmental solutions. Many of you may already know one famous element of desert architecture, the wind catcher, or in Persian, badgir. These tall structures captured wind and directed cool air into buildings, functioning like natural air conditioners. But today, I would like to focus on something less visible, something underground. Beneath the city of Yazd existed an extraordinary hidden infrastructure, the Qaris, or Qanat system. Qaris is the Persian name and Qanat Arabian name. The lines you see in this image represent the routes of canals surrounding in the city of Yazd. Many of these underground water canals continued beneath the city itself. As you know, a Qaris is a network of underground tunnels and wells that transports water from mountain aquifers over long distances into dry desert settlements. Without pumps or modern technology, gravity alone moved water to these underground canals. But the role of Qaris was not limited to supplying water. In Yazd and many other desert cities in Iran, underground water canals continued beneath neighborhoods and houses after entering the city. Cool mountain water flowed silently below the urban fabric. You can see here, not wells. This is the Zarch Qaris or Zarch Qanat, one of the oldest Qaris in the world, over 3,000 years and 71 kilometers long. Okay. So you can see the blue lines. The blue lines is the Qaris routes under the city. Under many traditional homes, there was a space called the payab or sarab, a staircase connected the house to the underground water canal below. You can see the center of Yazd in this picture, Jame Mosque and Old Bazaar, and a perspective view. You can see there is no vegetation in this image because Yazd is very, very arid city and there is no water for extending vegetation in the city. And now you can see the payab, a staircase connected the house or public buildings to the underground water canal below. During the hottest summer days, residents could descend into these underground spaces to escape the heat. The flowing water created naturally cool environments where people could rest, wash, store food, and access fresh water. The paya was much more than a basement or storage room. In combination with the airflow created by the wind catchers, it formed part of a larger environmental system designed to create thermal comfort without consuming external energy. You can see this in this picture, the relation between wind catcher and wind catcher above the building and canal in below of the building. Combination of wind and cool water can create a system like air conditioning. City itself became part of the cooling process. Narrow alleys, tall shading walls, sunken country yard known as Godal Bakche, and covered pathways all contributed to the urban cooling system. In a city where even water for irrigation trees was extremely limited, built elements and urban form themselves helped shape a sophisticated environmental cooling network. In this slide, you can see Godal Bakche, sunken courtyards, and the system of Godal Bakche that can create a cooling system in each building, in each yard of building. So this is what I found most fascinating about these historical cities. They did not fight against nature. They learned from it. They understood wind, water, sunlight, shade, soil, and topography. They developed urban systems that worked together with the environment rather than against it. In Isfahan, cooling occurred above ground through visible green blue corridors connected to the river. In Yazd, cooling occurred both above and below ground through hidden canal networks combined with wind catchers and the complex network of narrow urban passages. One system was visible and green, the other was almost invisible, combining underground and surface level environmental elements. But both were based on the same principle, creating environmental resilience through intelligent design. A knowledge system developed not through computers or modern simulations, but through generations of lived experience in the desert. Today, the importance of these historical environmental systems becomes even more evident when we examine contemporary metropolitan areas such as Tehran. Recent research in urban climatology demonstrates that green infrastructure plays a critical role in reducing urban temperatures and mitigating the urban heat islands effect. Studies conducted in Tehran show that urban green spaces can significantly reduce both surface and in-air temperature through several natural mechanisms. According to these studies, asphalt surfaces located under tree shade can be up to 20 degrees Celsius cooler than surfaces directly exposed to the sunlight. In addition, vegetation contributes to urban cooling through evapotranspiration. The research also demonstrates that the cooling effect of green space are not limited to the parks themselves. Large parks and interconnected green corridors can generate what researchers call urban cool islands, with cooling effects extending several hundred meters into surrounding neighborhoods. Another important conclusion is that the cooling performance of urban green spaces depends not only on their size, but also on their connectivity, spatial structure, tree density, and distribution throughout the city. Interconnected ecological networks are significantly more effective than small isolated green patches. Studies further suggest that even a 10% increase in urban tree canopy coverage in Tehran can lead to measurable reductions in urban temperatures and improvements in thermal comfort. However, perhaps the most important point emerges when we compare the historical cities of Iran with the condition of contemporary urban development. In historical cities such as Isfahan and Yazd, cooling systems were integrated into the original structure of the city itself. Madis, gardens, canals, wind catchers, and semi-underground spaces were embedded into the urban fabric from the beginning, and the city evolved according to climatic logic. In contrast, the case of Tehran demonstrates that we have developed a metropolitan area with a population of more than 10 million people without adequately incorporating these intelligent historical experiences into the process of urban growth. Not only did we fail to preserve these climate responsive systems, but we also destroyed many of them. Across the nearly 700 square kilometers of Tehran, extensive underground construction and urban development have damaged or erased large parts of historic canal network that once existed beneath the city. In this map, you can see the canal routes under Tehran that removed or disconnected or destroyed. Today, after the massive expansion of impervious surfaces, high-density construction, declining soil permeability, and destruction of many natural ecological networks, we are once again attempting to reintroduce similar ideas to urban greening, ecological corridors, and climate-responsive infrastructure. However, contemporary cities now face major limitations. There is neither sufficient available land nor adequate financial capacity to implement large-scale interventions capable of creating substantial climatic improvements across such vast metropolitan regions. This situation illustrates how neglecting climatic logic during urban development can ultimately impose costs far greater than those associated with environmentally responsive planning from the beginning. Perhaps one of the most important lessons we can learn from historical Iranian cities is that sustainability is not only about advanced technology. Sometimes the most intelligent solutions are already hidden within traditional knowledge. These cities remind us that urban resilience can emerge from understanding local climate, respecting natural systems, and designing cities as living ecological networks. I believe the future of sustainable urbanism may depend not only on inventing new technologies, but also on rediscovering and reinterpreting the environmental wisdom embedded within historical cities. The historical cities of Iran are not simply monuments of the past. They are living laboratories of climate adaptation. And perhaps in a warming world, they still have much to teach us. Thank you for your attention. I hope good time for you in this webinar.
All right, so that was Professor Mohammed presentation. So thank you very much for this thought-provoking presentation. So across these three talks, a strong shared message has emerged. Cooling air cities is not just a matter of shade or technical mitigation. It's about landscape as living infrastructure. And it's about also planting water, soil, public space, and microclimate. But it's also about memory, community, participation, everyday use, and the wisdom embedded in place, as Professor just mentioned now. So to help us bring together and with these ideas, with all these three presentations and speakers, I'm delighted to invite our co-director, Jane Welsh from the EFLA Climate Action Group, to lead this discussion and debate part segment, and then also to have with all of you to have an exchange of idea comments. I know that you have some comments in the chat that we will go through that in a couple of minutes, but in the meantime, Professor Jane, over to you.
Thanks so much, Carlos. So thank you all for such an informative and thoughtful presentation and how landscape architecture is applied in such an encompassing manner. Jala, with your consideration of utilizing landscape for energy and water efficiency, Beata for integrating community into the formation of landscapes, embodying the use of natural systems, Mohammed with the reference and understanding of how traditional practice allows humans to live in hot and arid cities with limited water access. So I graduated, I have to confess, about 40 years ago with my degree in landscape architecture. And one of the key lessons was understanding that I learned, that my takeaway that I took throughout my career was understanding the capacity of a site, what the local conditions were, which is why we developed the Toronto Green Standard. It was very specific to the city in that condition. And now that understanding, of course, has broadened to consider preparing for future climate and more resilient cities. So my question to both of you, because I don't think Mohammed can join, I don't see him there, is despite the long history and proven track record of this approach to landscape planning, did you get pushback in this approach to landscape design? Was it well received? Are there extra costs? Is it appreciated? Is it accepted and incorporated into government requirements? I don't know. Beata, should we start with you? You're muted, so there you go.
Well, I think Jala could say a little bit more about it. She's more grounded. I mean, I'm here, but yeah, Jala, maybe.
Sure, we can move it over to Jala. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that you have to understand that the profession is very, very new in the region. So it's not as if there is a mainstream practice track and you're proposing another track. There is no track, nothing. So when you come up with these ideas, I mean, for me, for water and energy,
Oops, I think Jala's frozen, or this is just for me?
I think she's frozen. Yeah.
Yes.
What bad timing? Yeah.
So maybe I will jump in. I think very often when you think about region, and this is again going back to the community and the work with community I have here, there is certain assumption that we have models that we are bringing to the region, and we just develop profession with the same track, but it's not not the case, because I mean, then we are talking again about colonizing landscape with the Western ideas. So this is why in my presentation, I talked a little bit about participatory approach and community gardens that are doing very well somewhere else, but here not always. So for instance, Jala is back, so I will just finish the thoughts. So sometimes you start with something that should be collective and should be shared, but then whenever you finish the project, you find out that everyone wants to have its own piece, and because the system works totally different. So I think there are many questions how this profession should work here and should have its own track, I think. Jala.
I don't know what happened. I was just saying that it took a while. Unfortunately, one of the disadvantages of working and practicing and teaching especially practicing in the global south, is that something becomes, ideas and concepts are adopted when they come from the global north. And it's often that local expertise, local solutions are, sometimes they're accepted, sometimes they're not. So this is the kind of resistance that you get. And because, a lot of these ideas were about sustainability before there was the concept of sustainability. And you can see even in Mohammed's talk, he kept saying responsive, climate responsive. This was the term we used, ecological and environmental responsiveness. But once sustainability became a catchword, and everybody was eager to show they were working in sustainable ways. So that was, that was when a lot of these ideas were better accepted. Another thing is that, again, in post-colonial cultures, we're always looking to the West to see what Western parks look like, what Western landscapes look like. We don't look to what we have. Look at the wealth that Mohammed showed in Iran, and look at all the importance of community that Beata brought to the table. I mean, greening is not about physical greening. It's about the people, their well-being, and their engagement in all of this. So again, this is something that both, aesthetic preferences and cultural priorities are biased towards the colonialist, those that colonized us, which is mainly from the global south. So these are the two big areas where we need to push against.
If I could add to that, I started to talk about the same while you were frozen. So I would like to add that some concepts, like concept of Jala, what you mentioned, sustainability, but Hima concepts from the region, it's much older than even the word. So I don't know, Jane, if you are aware of this concept, but it's community managed land, that it's protecting resources, it's protecting water, and this concept was spread all over in the Middle East. So now there are, of course, and I believe, Jala, you were directly involved in bringing back this concept to life. But I think there's a lot that is forgotten, and always, as Jala said, looking to the north and trying to just adopt the same solutions, like with community gardens. I participated in community garden program, and it was very funny because everyone had small plot, and here at AUB, and professors from AUB were invited. And then there was a research, how it contributed to my well-being. And I said, it didn't. It didn't, because someone was picking my tomatoes all the time. Whenever I was coming back, they were not there, because other professors assume that if it is community, it's all for us. So whenever I go, I can pick whenever. I mean, it's not about stealing, but it's about like totally different concept. If it is my garden, it's my garden. So, but again, like if we think about adopting certain notions, and this is, I really had a lot of discussions with colleagues who came from Germany, from Poland, from France. We met in Jordan and we were working with community. And at the beginning, they were like very surprised why we cannot organize it in the same way like it is in Germany, because not.
It's so, you raise a very good point. It's not just understanding the land, but it's understanding the people and the culture and how that dynamic works to deliver a system.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what is very scary also, because climate here is very fragile, and scarcity of water and all this management of landscape, the ancient methods of management of landscape, understanding all of this, because of the conflict that is ongoing, also is deleted. Plus, of course, in many regions, we have people coming from totally different climate, and they try to manage land away. Of course, they have many smart solutions, new solutions, but sometimes we don't need to look for new solutions, because all solutions are there and they are working well.
One of the textbooks that I used at school was called A Pattern Language, and it was very interesting because the author had put that the sacred place should be at the top of the hill, right? But in the Indigenous culture in Canada, that doesn't work, because that the sacred place is meant to be within the community. So it's really interesting how you say that the imposition of different values that are brought through by well-meaning people doesn't always work in a community at all.
Sorry, Beata, I was just going to add to this. For example, in southern Lebanon, again, something very similar. It's the contrary. Settlements are on hilltops because valleys are valuable, good, fertile soil to cultivate, which is the livelihood. So, so all of these patterns affect, they respond to the ecology, they respond to community needs, and there's a lot that we can, I think it's evident that we can learn from these. And but again, with, like Beata said, with war and with the drive to development, to accommodate growing population, these practices disappear. I've written also about in southern Lebanon how there are communal communal water ponds. It's incredible how did they manage to collect water in a hilly terrain, but they do, and people started filling these water ponds with sand to have a park, because a park is an indication of modernizing the village. So we lose a lot of these practices. I'm very happy to see that Mohammed shows from Iran. Perhaps sometimes because it was isolated and boycotted, a lot of these traditions have been preserved. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but this could be one reason. And people are proud of these religions. They're lived in. So this is, again, something we need to think about when we're looking at climate, and when we're looking at climatic adaptations. It's to also to showcase them, to see how they can be used, so that it's not just superficial inspiration, but rather the underlying concepts inspire solutions to the region.
So another question did emerge in the chat. I don't know if you were following it, and that was about biodiversity and access and use of native materials. So is that a challenge in your respective practices? And what? Go ahead,
Yeah, it's two. I have two examples. One of them from the Gulf states, from the Emirates, United Arab Emirates, where there was this obsession, and Gareth Doherty talks about it in Paradoxes of Green. He talks about this obsession with actual green, lawns and flowers and a green landscape, which is not sustainable. And so that was really the mainstream practice. But eventually, there is a counter movement advocating trees like the gaff tree, Gaghaf, it's a prosopis, and making it a sacred tree, making it really a national symbol. So slowly trying to pick up on biodiversity and native plants. And in Saudi Arabia, in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they're working very hard on protected areas and ex situ conservation of biodiversity in deserts. In Lebanon, the industry has wisened up to the use of native plants. And you have now successful local plant nurseries that develop native plants so that landscape architects and projects can use them. They're seen as part of their heritage, their Mediterranean heritage. So you have different approaches to biodiversity. But the key, I think, is to combine what I said, what I concluded with. You have to overlap. You cannot just think of climate and think of biodiversity. You really have to bring them together and bring other aspects together so that there is an important synergy that comes together. And they are more likely to have an impact rather than just looking at biodiversity. This is one of the problems. And Mohammed alluded to this at the end of his talk. The main advantage of us as landscape architects is that we bring things together. We put things together. It's holistic. We don't look at fragments and systems. Architects look at building. Urban designers look at systems maybe and larger chunks. But we look at all of it, the people and the environment, the ecology, and the society. So I think we really need to bring this into whatever climate action we propose. I'll stop there.
If I may add to Jala, just very quick note, because I think two things happened in Lebanon that were very bad, but actually they were good at the end. Because first of all, the financial crisis, huge crisis in Lebanon. Lebanon was so dependent on delivery from Italy, from Greece, so their nurseries were sending plants. But of course, with the crisis, we were not able to afford, so we started to produce locally, and this is for agriculture as well. But another thing that happened is pandemic. Pandemic, people were not able to go outside, and it's not something in the culture to go to the nature. And suddenly, you cannot imagine how many hiking groups are there, because this was the only chance to go outside and go somewhere, not because it was not allowed to be on the street. So I think crisis also helps to go back to certain notions, and challenges might help to really go into new development. So
I see Carlos has his hand up.
Yes, so we have a question from our public. This is from Fatima Navian. She asks, how can we bring such solutions in our cities with recent developments and infrastructure like Tehran to any of our speakers?
I mean, go ahead, Abby.
Go ahead. Okay, so how we can bring, I think, again, going back to awareness and education, because this is one thing. Another thing, this awareness should reach, of course, architects and people responsible for design, but it should be based on participatory planning. So this is where if people, they have voice, that it's not very common. At least in Lebanon, it's very top down. So participation is not part of the culture. And this is why I was mentioning, for instance, the digital tools, because what resulted, we did this workshop, one was in face-to-face, another was virtual workshop. And virtual workshop, you have, no one can see you, no one can see your face expression. So while in face-to-face workshop was dominated by mature males, let's say, another workshop, suddenly people who didn't have voice started to say, no, I would prefer this, I would prefer that. So this is something, again, not very, very common. Some people were like surprised, like, why are you asking me? Some people from like very powerful stakeholders, they said, no, we don't want to have any workshop. We don't want to ask people. So I mean, this is something, again, building new culture where people can have voice, and we can really go back to this. Of course, it's not very often, it's not aligned with very, I would say, very strong development lobby that is focusing just on income. And yeah.
Did you want to add, Jella?
Yeah, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Again, one way, what Fatima is asking is how do we bring those historic traditional practices into today's practice? One way is to, again, expand the scope and put several issues together, like what Mohammed was talking about. There was water, there was climate, there was the urban scale, there was the local scale. If you start putting these together and framing them as heritage and identity, people are much more likely to accept them than if you say biodiversity conservation. What is biodiversity conservation? Oh, why do people care about biodiversity? And even climate change. Yes, they realize things that it's getting hotter, but anyway, it was so hot to begin with. But when you start putting some of these together, I honestly have succeeded in projects when framing them as it's your heritage. Look, your ancestors have done this. Look, this is your identity. People are much more likely to adopt what you are saying because they own it. It's a little bit what Beata was saying again, Yani. That is one way of engaging the community, but another is framing it as heritage, as identity, as something that is meaningful to the public, not just the public, government officials. When you tell them, look, you're looking for an identity, this is a new state, this is your identity, immediately they adopt it. I've had this happen in many projects. So that is my answer. Again, multifunction, frame it, put in identity, culture, sustainability, water scarcity, climate action, put it all together. And, and you will have a long-term sustainable solution that is adopted and appreciated by the community, which is in the end what we want.
That was beautifully said. And it was actually one of my thoughts or questions is how does this contribute to sense of place? But I think you've articulated that really well. And that's wonderful that you can have this multi-pronged approach that gets at that sense of identity. One last question. I think we need to move back to Carlos in a second, but you had started on it a bit, Beata, at how can innovation and technology address the gap to make cities more resilient? You had started a bit with the mapping tools, right?
Yes, yeah. So what we work on this in this chapter, we were checking what technologies are used already, and now with especially with AI, you can really have very good approximation and scenarios what can be done. And you can think about very typical, very precise parameters. But the problem is that technology is not all. And unfortunately, sometimes, I mean, yes, it shows you very well what should be done, but sometimes it's not feasible, it's not possible, or the community doesn't want to accept it because of other reasons. So when community doesn't accept certain solutions, obviously they are not going to be sustainable. So I think what we found out that in our region also there is still research gap, I would say, something, maybe we have it a little bit in Saudi Arabia already, but still it's not like, for instance, in Europe where all data is available. You just go to the dedicated portal, you can download everything, maps, and then you can really work on the analysis. Here it's a little bit different and a little bit more difficult for analysis, but it's ongoing. So, of course, we have our package of participatory GIS to map the community. But of course, we have the digital modeling, mathematical and statistical modeling. But sometimes the problem is not the lack of tools, but the lack of data, especially for some regions.
That makes sense. Anything to add? Are you good? Carlos, should we turn it over to you? Thank you all so much. I learned so much from hearing your presentations and that of Mohammed too. So thank you very much for your time today. And I'm so glad that we made this one happen. It's so important.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you both to all three professors, Beata, Jala, and Professor Mohammed, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, but we are really, really, truly honored to have his presentation. We have one more question from Omar. So let's just try to dig that just one. So he mentions in hyper-arid regions, particularly in the Gulf region, which key parameters and management issues should be monitored to ensure the long-term sustainability and optimal performance of parks and landscapes?
I believe it's, as we said, water, I think, is very, very important because really, and because in the Emirates, water is used excessively, and it's mainly from salination plant. Recycling, circularity is a very important concept that's coming into cities, into landscapes. So how can we reuse maybe gray water and so on. So I think water is a key parameter when you are in a desert region such as the Emirates. But again, I would still try to frame and reference it both as a technology, like as innovative technologies, because people like that, but also as tradition. And traditionally, people knew how to manage. I mean, they also needed water. Of course, they did not use it as accessibly as we do, but they had ways of being, water wise. And I think we should look to both past and the future. But water by far, I think, is number one.
It's
And
like perfect
energy.
closing sentence.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
It is, it is. So, so as we close, I really want to thank all the speakers today. Again, Jala, Beata, and Professor Mohammed, for the generous and quite deeply insightful contributions. And of course, Jane and Tamsin for being here and direct this debate, which is so rich, so insightful. It's just, I'm so honored to actually be here to listen to you guys. It's fantastic. And so today's session has shown that cooling area cities is just not about just cosmetic greening, like just showed us and exposed to us. It's about designing with the climate, water, like you just mentioned, Jala, vegetation, soil, culture, the community, the public life as interconnected systems, as also Professor Mohammed mentioned, and then also in different scales, as Professor Beata just mentioned as well, from particular habits, right? So it's about making cities more breathable, more adaptable, more adaptive, and more just. So thank you everyone who joined us today. We're so grateful for your presence and attention. And we're looking forward to continue this conversation in the future session, which is going to be Africa focused session. I think that's going to be next week. We are just fingers crossed to make that happen. So thank you very much to everyone. So just a closing remarks from Jane and Tamsin, if Tamsin is there, please.
I am here. Again, thank you so much. That was amazing presentation. And it just a reminder to me to understand the different perspectives that different cultures bring to landscapes. We share many of the same issues across the world and definitely in Canada. But anyway, I was going to add to the Middle East is very special to me because my father was there for a few years in the early 50s. So he always, he was so grounded and loved it so much, and he brought that to his children. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.